Hi guys, my name is Michael. Welcome back. Welcome to our second episode in our XLM Insights. And today we'll be talking about XLM or Stellar as a disaster recovery system. Now, if you watched my previous series on XRP Insights, in one of the episodes, I talked about XRP as this sort of disaster recovery mechanism, right? And I talked about the fact that, XRP right now is like a spare tire, and we know how people treat spare tires, right? You don't look at it until there is a disaster with your current tires, right? So that is what XLM also is, right? And I'm going to talk about the difference between XLM's disaster scenario versus XRP. Now, when we talk about disaster recovery, that is a technical term mainly used for in IT and all these places. But a lot of people who have paid attention to history, right? Another term that you can use for disaster recovery is something called order out of chaos, OOC. And that model has been used throughout history, right? Every time you see every time a new thing is about to be introduced, we always see some sort of chaos, and then we see that order come out. We see that document or that treaty or that agreement will be drawn out from that chaos. The Brentwood agreement is an example. War and everything, and then you get that order out of the chaos. So most times in the world there is always that rollout of chaos, and then you see order. And this guy sums it up better. Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, he says, never let a crisis go to waste. And so that is the model that is used around the world. So every time you see chaos, you probably see an order. Now, in this particular case, we are able to understand the order before we see the chaos. So we are reverse engineering, right? We have seen the order, we have seen what is going to come out, right? And so we study it to understand what the chaos is going to look like, right? We study it, we see the disaster recovery plan, and then we understand that, okay, this is the likely disaster that will take place. It's just like, if you came out of your house and you looked at your neighbor and you see your neighbor digging ditches, you see your neighbor, preparing a bunker or doing certain things to his house, depending on what you see him doing, you'll be able to understand what sort of disaster he's preparing for. Or if you see him raising up his foundations of the house higher, to your first floor, you understand that I think this guy is anticipating a flood or something. So with XRP, right, the disaster scenario for that disaster recovery plan, right, is issues with the bank, issues with liquidity, issues with, some sort of a crisis with banks and everything. That is the likely disaster scenario for XRP, where XRP will come in and then save the day and become the de facto infrastructure and all that. That is the scenario. But for XLM now, given that we understand what XLM is, which is currency and money, then if you want to reverse engineer that process and think about it, what is the disaster that would happen that would make XLM come into view? Then you're thinking about the debt of currencies. So what we're going to see, whether it's the black swan, whether it's a financial crisis or anything, the next event that would affect the global economy financially will lead to an erosion of trust in national currencies, or what I call the debt of currencies. So I talked about this in my last video about Zimbabwe, right? When you look at what happened to Zimbabwe, when Zimbabwe went into hyperinflation, right? What we saw was that the citizens lost faith and confidence in the national currencies. And so a lot of people began to use the US dollar in place of the national currency, the Zimbabwe national currency, right? People were using the US dollar to trade. So people were pricing goods in US dollars. And you would go to a store, you would have two prices on the bread. You would have the Zimbabwe price and you would have the dollar price. And even the sellers, even the merchants prefer to collect the dollars rather than the Zimbabwe money. And this is happening in a little way in a lot of countries. If you go to Nigeria, for instance, there was a period where they had issues with the currency. A lot of people started pricing in dollars because the faith. There was a little bit of loss of trust in the currencies, even though that is a lot better now. But you can see those symptoms, right, in some nations, Lebanon, some nations are doing it on a low level. Do you get? But it's everywhere. Venezuela, for instance, if you go there with US dollars, people will gladly accept it. They will give you change in US dollars as well. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that is the likely scenario, or that is a likely disaster where we would see XLM kicking, the death of currencies. So something is going to happen, a financial event, a financial black swan, whatever you want to call it, that is going to make people lose trust in these four nations. We're talking about the United States, we're talking about Japan, we're talking about possibly the EU and maybe the UK. So something is going to happen that will make people, maybe over time, lose trust in the currencies or in the national currencies, right? And this most likely will be inflation or something where people just feel like, what, things are getting out of hand. I can't store my savings in the US dollar because, it is the inflation rate, what do they call this thing? Loss of purchasing power, right? And so XLM, like I said in my last video, will become a store of value, just like the way in some African countries, the US dollar is a store of value. So most people who have long-term savings plan save their money, convert their money into US dollars. Sorry about that. So like I was saying, most people convert, the local currency into US dollar, right, to preserve purchasing power. And so that is what we're going to see, right? And if you think about it, if you go around the world, right, a lot of people use the US dollar, right, as a store of value, right, against their national currencies. So, but when the US dollar has issues, what will be the store of value, right? If the store of value of nations, it's no longer a store of value, right? What will people use? So, what I'm trying to say here is that the likely, the disaster recovery scenario for Stellar Lumen is for XLM is actually the death of currencies, major currencies around the world. And so it's important for us to have this understanding that, there are issues, there are problems that are going to arise in the next couple of months that will affect the currency, will affect people's confidence in their local or national currencies. And that is where, like I said, you have this parallel system where you have the national currency running on one side, and then you have Lumens or Stellar also running on the other side. And then because of the ease of use and because of the store of value nature of Stellar, right, people will prefer to go to Stellar or to use Stellar or to accept Stellar than accept the national currencies. And so it's important for us to understand these things, just like the way we talked about XRP, how banks will prefer, because when there's an issue with the current system, in the case of XRP, probably Swift or anything, people will then prefer to use XRP. And so the same thing is true with XLM. When there's an issue with the currencies of the nations, the people in those nations and even outside of those nations will move to Stellar, we'll move to XLM at that point. So it's important for us to have this at the back of our mind, so that you can prepare adequately or position yourself in such a way that disruptions to currencies do not affect you, because I feel like that's where a lot of people are going to lose most of their assets, or most of their that is something that's going to affect a lot of people, because a lot of people have their entire wealth stored in a particular currency, and all that. And so if that currency loses 50% overnight, and it is going to affect a lot of people. So when you look at Stellar, when you look at investing in Stellar, you look at it as a replacement for the currency that you're currently holding. Do you get? As a store of value. Do you understand? So if I was, quote unquote, example now, if you look at the way inflation and the loss of the erosion of purchasing power is going, right? If you're saving for 10 years, if you're saving for the next 5 years, you need to have a strategy for that savings. If not, if you're saving for college or whatever, by the time you get to the 5 years, inflation would have taken half of the money. Do you understand what I'm saying? So most people save in tips or save in things that can keep up with inflation, if I can put it that way. So in the future, I believe that XLM will be that thing where people put their money in, for the long term, or for, to avoid the erosion of purchasing power. So when you think about everything that we have said, right, you then begin to understand that an investment in XLM is actually a hedge against issues with the currency. So investing in XLM and buying XLM, obviously this is not financial advice, is actually a multi-currency strategy. It's actually a hedge against inflation. Do you understand? So it's important for us to have this at the back of our minds, right? And like I said, these are my opinions. This is not financial advice. I'm just telling you based on my understanding of these technologies. I believe that, investing in XLM, or I believe that people who are buying XLM are actually buying a hedge against inflation, are actually buying into a multi-currency strategy. Do you understand? So it's important for us to have that at the back of our mind so that you know and understand what you are holding. You get? So you understand what you're holding. And so I just thought I'd bring this to your attention, guys. So much to talk about here, but I'm trying to put it in such a way that, people are able to get value from the conversation that we're having here. So guys, if you like videos like this, please click on the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.